Hi guys and welcome to my latest review. Now what I have here today is Khadas Tone 2 Pro, and just a short history about it. This is the second generation of the device, and the first one was called Khadas Tone Board, or short KTB, and I reviewed that one like year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. I really loved it. I raved quite a bit about it. At the moment, when it came to the market, it used to cost 99 bucks, but it was a naked board. Just a board without any casing like the successor has. But anyway, it was a little bit of hassle to assemble it into a casing, but it did provide great sound at the time that no competition, in my opinion, could match. For example, at that time we had something like Topping D10 or D30 or SMSL Sanskrit 10th, the original version, and the Khadas Tone board, in my opinion, sounded better than all of them, so I kept it in my own system at that time for like 6 months, and it was really tough one to beat. But in the meantime, competition, of course, didn't sit still. They introduced a lot of great devices like Topping E30, hifi Zen DAC. Then we have SMSL Sanskrit MK2, which is great device, and all of these represented a better value. They were like finished products with casing and all the buttons and displays and everything. So it was time for Khadas to introduce a successor to the Tone board. But this time we don't have board in the title anymore because it's not board anymore. Now it's a small compact device, but it's fully functional the moment you take it out of the box. So they simply call it Tone 2 Pro. And it's still based on the exact same Sabre DAC chip. But a lot of things are new, and I'm quickly going to go through the features and like what do you get with this one, and then we'll move to the sound, of course. So as you can see, this is really small device. It's like pocket friendly, but unfortunately it doesn't have a battery, so it's not meant to be used with your phones. And there are a lot of new things here to talk about. First of all, the addition of headphone amp section. The original one didn't have that, it was just a DAC, but this one added headphone outputs, and two of them also. We have single-ended 3.5 millimeters and balanced output 4.4 or pentacon output. And on the back we have usual single-ended RCA line outputs, but also something that I have never seen before. These are actually combined RCA outputs because Khadas made that you can use it as single-ended and as balanced ones. But if you want to use balanced output, you have to buy specific cables, set of cables like adapters that will adapt from these custom-made balanced RCAs to XLR that are much more common. And if you have any balanced cables and you want to hook this to your integrated amp, you probably have XLR cables. So because inside of these there are separate pins for single-ended out and for balanced out, and you cannot you can normally use single-ended cables. Any RCA cable will do just fine. I tried it, I did that. But for balanced connection, you first have to buy cable adapter from Khadas that will make these into XLR. That said, when we talk about inputs, we have USB digital input and coaxial digital input. Also, another USB input, second one, its function is twofold. First of all, you can use external linear power supply or any low noise power supply to improve its sound quality, but you can also use it to add an external Bluetooth dongle. And as you can see, I quickly powered it on, so I can show you some features. I will go quickly through it because it has so much things that you can tinker with that this video is just not long enough. And yeah, the important things. Volume knob, that's its function by default, it's a volume knob, but you also use it to control everything else on the DAC. And to do that, you actually have to double click this. This acts as a joystick also. And then you control some other functions. Double click again, you go to another setting, and so on and so on. I cannot remember currently all of these colors and functions and everything, but you have a very extensive manual with all of the possible colors listed here. So for example, first time when you click this 2 times down, you enter into a mode where you choose low gain or high gain for headphone outputs. When you repeat it 2 clicks down again, you go to another setting, for example choosing a digital filter, and then by turning this knob up and down you change into a different, actually at the moment I'm in the digital filter setting. Yeah, and you choose the one, you double down again, choose the next setting, double down, and so on and so on. Of course, when you finish with everything, you just cycle back to the volume control, which is the one that you'll normally use most of the time. It's a little bit tricky at first. You have to use the manual, you have to look at the color coding to see what you're actually doing. But once you get used to it, it's still tricky, but I don't really care because these other things are something that I'm going to do only once. I'm going to choose filter once. I'm going to tinker with some other settings until I get the right one. And then like 99% of the time, it will serve only as a volume knob, and that's fine. And I probably missed something about its features and so on, but I think that's okay. You can find that online in other places. You can read the manual when it comes to how it's actually controlled and so on. But we're now going to move to the most important thing, and that's sound quality. And just before I do that, I forgot to mention the price. Tone 2 took a price hike, now it's $200. But you also get a lot more for your money, like headphone outputs, balanced outputs, volume control, and so on. It's simply more than the first one that was just a plain DAC board without a case even. Okay, so now let's continue to the sound part. And I have to say that you definitely notice similarities with the first Khadas Tone board, but I guess many of you haven't heard that one, so I will not linger on that comparison that much. What that means is that Khadas Tone board is a good Sabre DAC. It has focused sound, it has precise sound, but what I liked about the first one, I also like about this one, it's that it's not too sharp sounding. It's not high frequency focused, but it's actually very nicely balanced throughout the frequency spectrum. And starting with the bass line, it's quick, it's precise, and bass notes are really nimble. When I listen to a bass guitar, I can hear all of the different strings very well separated, very well controlled, and placed. For example, inside of the soundstage, bass note is firmly placed in its position, while many other DACs at this price point cannot do that. But the weight itself and the punch is not that great. So when you think about the bass line, it's more of a quick, speedy, precise, but not that much weighty. And some of you will probably love that. I like it quite a bit. Some of you might miss a little bit of grunt in that region. But moving to the mid-range, I again really like it. Similar to the original Khadas Tone board, it's quite mid-range centric sound. It has nice density and it has nice tone. Vocals sound great, and everything else, like I don't know, some wooden instruments and everything that has a little bit more of a body and not just some sharp edge, sounds great. It's always precise, it's always detailed, well separated, but it's never too sharp or analytical to my ears. And probably this next part, like higher frequencies, helps with that, because higher frequencies are again detailed. I feel there's enough of that higher spectrum, but compared to some other DACs, it feels a little bit toned down, a little bit tamer, and that's probably one of the things that creates this type of voicing, where I feel that everything is neat, precise and detailed, but never sharp and never too tacky. And I'll best describe this by simply comparing it with some other DACs at this price range. And I started doing that by comparing it to Topping E30. That's a little bit more affordable, but it's DAC only, it doesn't have headphone outputs. And what I found is that Tone 2 Pro offers a little bit tighter presentation, a little bit more focused, and while E30 draws a little bit wider, more dispersed soundstage, but E30 also sounds a little bit thinner and a little bit more flat. It sounds wide and airy, it has a lot of details, but it sounds a little bit flat in comparison. This one has more focus and it's able to pinpoint things a little bit better and create a little bit better soundstage depth. That said, it doesn't sound as airy and as open as E30, so it's just a little bit darker sounding. And when it comes to details, both are really great, but this one again feels a little bit more precise, as I mentioned, a little bit more focused, while E30 plays a little softer, a little bit more dispersed. In isolation, both are great, but comparing them directly, I keep preferring Khadas Tone 2 a little bit. So similarly, if I compare it to SMSL Sanskrit 10th MK2, now that one has a tone that is more full-bodied than Topping E30, but still it cannot match the precision and that slightly better soundstage recreation with better pinpointing and soundstage depth of Tone 2 Pro. And if I compare it to something that's probably more price appropriate, like Shit Modi Multibit, especially for viewers from the US, that one is $250. For the rest of the world, it's more expensive. But and it's also only a DAC, so maybe it's not a fair comparison. This is DAC slash headphone amp, it's 2-in-1 device. But if you only need a DAC and you live in the US, I still feel that Shit Modi Multibit can offer fuller tone and richer tone timbre with better feeling of palpability of notes and everything feeling more three-dimensional. But if you like saber sound and if you like something that's more precise, quicker, more nimble, just like snappier, this one is as good of a Delta Sigma DAC that I've ever heard at this price point. Especially when you use some sort of low noise power supply hooked to it, it increases dynamics and clarity a little bit, but that goes for basically any DAC that's DC powered. Okay, so now let's move on to the headphone outputs. And I first used it as a single-ended out, and I realized that in low gain mode I would have just enough power to drive my planar hi-fi mans. But in some songs that have low recording volume, I would have to max it out completely. So I switched to high gain mode. I didn't notice any drawbacks because I did so, but I did notice much higher power output. And at that moment, this little thing was perfectly capable of driving these planars. Now they are 34 ohms, but they are demanding in terms of current. They need power. They're not all that sensitive. I'll put it on the screen, like Khadas provided us with what's the maximum impedance you should use with it. Like high impedance headphones like 600 ohms, that's out of the question. You need a powerhouse with high voltage at headphone output for these headphones. But for most of the others, this little thing packs a very decent punch. Now, that said, let's talk a little bit about its sound signature, and it's actually very similar to its DAC section that I was describing previously. You have that dense mid-range centric sound with quick, precise, nimble bass line, but the bass doesn't have much weight. It doesn't have much punch. So if you like that, this little thing will not produce that kick and slam to get you excited. So for example, for some sort of electronic music, I don't know, drum and bass and techno, things like that, I would not go with this one. But for like acoustics, I don't know, jazz, blues, something like that, it sounds great because it has a lot of details, it has a lot of control, and it's voiced in that way that you will never notice anything sharp and annoying. You can listen to it for a long period of times, but it's not warm either because it has quick bass, it has dense mid-range, and it's slightly tamed up top. And that's actually a pretty nice voicing for some genres of music that are more calm, more easygoing, and doesn't require a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. Next I moved to the balanced out, and I immediately noticed more energy. Power increases, and with it sound becomes more energetic, but it also has better separation, better layering. Okay, don't get me wrong, it's not that it sounded muddy before, but in comparison with balanced out, single-ended one sounds a little bit hazy and a little bit just melted, while the balanced output just spreads everything a little bit more, separates everything. It's just easier to hear individual notes and edges, and balanced one is proving to be superior almost every time. Now, of course, I compared it to several other things that I had on hand, and first of all was topping E30 L30 stack. So first of all, that stack offers much more power. It can drive basically anything, because L30 headphone amp is much more powerful than the one integrated here. But in terms of just sound fidelity and clarity, I felt them to be pretty comparable, and of course you would get more of that bass authority from the stack, but in terms of details and edges and textures, they were very close. If I use single-ended out on Tone 2 Pro, I feel that stack is a little bit more detailed. It has cleaner and crisper edges. But if I move to balanced out with Tone 2 Pro, then I feel it takes a slight lead in terms of resolving details and clean and crisp edges, but the stack still has the advantage when it comes to bass kick, when it comes to authority, and that's to be expected. And then I did something interesting. I actually used Tone 2 Pro only as a DAC, and I hooked it to topping L30 headphone amp. And again, as I mentioned before, I found Tone 2 Pro to be better DAC than topping E30. So that combination, Tone 2 Pro L30, sounded really nice because you could clearly hear that L30 packs more punch, more authority, just weightier than Tone 2 Pro's own headphone out. And that actually led me to a conclusion that Khadas Tone 2 Pro is a great DAC. It's very precise, it has a lot of details, it has speed, it pinpoints and layers things greatly. But when it comes to headphone output, it's still very good, but it cannot match just the power and the authority that separates can give you. So, but as an all-in-one device, I think it's a really rounded solution. And if you don't have some especially demanding headphones, it will do a fine job. Just if you're not a bass head, because if you are, I don't think it's for you. You know, the bass line, as I mentioned, it's speedy, it's quick, it's very well controlled, but it's not weighty and it doesn't have much slam. But everything else is really great. You have great tonally balanced character, a nice dense mid-range, really nice vocals, detail retrieval. It's a little bit darker up top, so it never sounds harsh, it never sounds edgy. As I mentioned, it's quite mid-range centric, and I love that very much because, as I mentioned, it suits my own preferences and my own favorite music genres, and I also feel that's something that we don't encounter much on the market, because a lot of DAC amps try to sound exciting, so they add a little bit of bass oomph, or they add a little bit of zest in the upper frequencies to make everything sparkle a little bit more or sound juicy a little bit more. But this is just a very neat, tight, controlled type of sound with dense mid-range. And don't get me wrong, you still have very decent bass line, you still have a lot of details in the higher spectrum, but like mid-range is the star of the show. And with that, I'm finishing slowly. I already talked too much. So yeah, price took a hike. It's now $200, but so did functionality. You know, now you have a DAC, you have a really decent headphone amp, you have single-ended and balanced outputs on both line out and headphone out. So I have to say I like it. You know, they built upon something that was really good, that was a good base. They improved its sound, they added a lot of features, then they increased price appropriately. And if you're on the market for a DAC amp combo up to $200, then this is definitely the one that you should consider at least. Just weigh the pros and cons. And I don't feel it actually has much cons, but just think about the voicing that I mentioned. Is it for you? Do you think you would like that? If you would, then this is a great little device and I can easily recommend it. But if you want a little bit more of bass oomph or high-end sparkle, things like that, then maybe better to look for some other device. But if you're after neat, precise, focused sound, this one is great. It suits my personal taste really, and I like it very much. So that would be all for today, guys. I hope you liked this video. If you did, then please hit the button, share it with your friends and so on, and see you next time. Bye.